Welcome to Podkey Fantasy Football, where this episode is all about pressure testing draft season assumptions. A lot of draft advice sounds clean until you ask what has to go right for it to work. This year especially, the market's moving fast at quarterback and tight end, and that changes what counts as value. In tight end premium, the scoring change is real. Moving to 1.5 PPR doesn't magically make every tight end special, but it does raise the entire position enough that drafts often pull the top names up about a round. That's why you keep seeing FFPC and best ball rooms hit a middle round tight end run. The format is pushing drafters to pay for weekly positional separation, and the market reacts before the points even hit your lineup. The two strategies that actually make sense are pretty clear. Either pay early for a truly elite tight end, or wait and draft a bunch of volatile mid and late options, especially in best ball, where spike weeks get captured automatically. What doesn't hold up well is the in-between panic build, where you take 3 or 4 tight ends in the range where you're supposed to be building your running back and wide receiver core. That's usually paying premium prices without getting elite certainty. The win rate data matters here, but it needs context. 0 tight ends in the first 10 rounds came in around an 8.3% win rate, while 4 or 5 tight end builds were more like 9.1 to 9.7%. That's an edge, but it's a modest one, and it's telling you more about roster construction discipline than about any one player. Brock Bowers is where format theory becomes player-specific. As a rookie, he put up around 112 catches, 1,194 yards, and 5 touchdowns, and that already puts him in rare territory for the position. If analysts and MarketScore are calling him the top tight end, and even flirting with first-round value in some formats, the argument isn't just hype, it's that he may be giving you wide receiver-level volume in a scarce slot. Still, first-round tight ends require a high bar. You're passing on wide receivers and running backs with cleaner volume paths, so Bowers has to sustain both health and role. The generational label may be justified, but the price can still get ahead of the edge. Trey McBride is almost the inverse case. The target share is strong enough to keep him in the elite conversation, but there are fair questions about whether his earlier breakout came in a passing volume environment that may not fully repeat. If his yards per game settles lower while the ADP drifts down too, that's where he becomes interesting again. Bowers has the cleaner ceiling story. McBride may end up being the better price-adjusted bet. Quarterback pricing got weird this year. More than 60 quarterbacks going between rounds 5 and 10 tells you the room isn't calmly selecting values, it's compressing the position and forcing timing decisions. In single QB seasonal leagues, waiting can still work. In best ball tournaments, and especially Superflex, waiting past an early run can mean you're no longer choosing among difference makers, you're choosing among survivors. That matters because late quarterback value isn't just about who scores decently in tournaments. You need access to ceiling weeks, stackable passing volume, and playoff advance outcomes. The replacement level can look fine in average points and still be dead for first-place equity. Patrick Mahomes around QB14 is a good example of the market overcorrecting. If the thesis is simply that he returns to his normal top 12 range, then the downside is limited relative to price and the upside is obvious. Mobile quarterbacks complicate this further. Malik Willis averaging about 8.5 rushing PPR points in 6 starts shows why rushing is such a cheat code, but those points only matter if he's actually on the field and not trapped in a fragile coaching or depth chart situation. MarketScore sounds like the kind of metric people can misuse very quickly, so the right framing matters. It's a 0 to 100 ADP adjusted model that blends prior production with draft price to estimate expected fantasy output and break-even cost. The useful part is not that it replaces rankings, it's that it separates player quality from market cost a little more cleanly than raw ADP does by layering in per game and per route evidence. The model also gets less confident on purpose after certain draft thresholds, around pick 120 for running backs and wide receivers, and around 180 for quarterbacks and tight ends, because correlation breaks down in that range. That's sensible. Once the market gets that thin, conviction should usually drop. Some examples are telling. Jalen Hurts grading well fits both ceiling and consistency. Nico Collins scoring strongly supports the idea that his early round price still has room. Mike Evans grading low is the kind of output that forces a real question about whether drafters are paying for repeatable usage or for last year's box scores. Running back is where a lot of fantasy arguments smuggle in optimism. The 400-touch history on its own doesn't predict collapse for every back, but a roughly 20% decline rate the following year is enough to treat massive workloads as a warning, not a badge of safety. That's the Christian McCaffrey debate. If he's healthy, the path to 19 or 20 PPR points per game is still right there. If the workload and age finally catch up, you're suddenly holding a first-round pick with a very ordinary outcome or missed time. So calling him high variance is more honest than calling him washed or calling him inevitable. The upside case is supported. The downside case is also supported. David Montgomery is a different kind of bet. The argument for him is not explosiveness theatre. It's boring volume plus goal line access plus enough efficiency to make that volume count. In best ball, that's often undervalued because drafters chase contingent upside and forget that 300-touch seasons still win a lot of weeks. Bucky Irving shows the opposite tension. The stretch production and efficiency metrics are exciting, but recurring injury risk and a degraded offensive line are exactly the kind of second-order issues that can break a breakout. The old zero RB blanket advice doesn't look as sturdy in a tighter running back market. If backs are getting pushed up and the mid-range is thinner, a hybrid build with 2 early backs and a patient RB3 can make more structural sense. Stacking is still powerful, but it creates its own tax. Once a quarterback's primary wide receiver or tight end becomes the obvious stack partner, their ADP often absorbs that story. You need to ask whether you're gaining correlation or just paying for everyone else's correlation. Format details matter too. In double flex or 2 flex rooms, wide receiver depth gains value because those extra start slots reward bankable weekly scoring. Bye-week planning is more marginal, but in large tournaments, even small edges can matter if the room is ignoring them. And this is where draft tools earn their keep. In fast-moving, high-stakes rooms, live ADP sync and roster awareness aren't luxuries. They help you avoid getting trapped by runs that feel strategic in the moment, but leave your build unbalanced. Coaching changes deserve attention, but they also attract too much certainty. Saying Mike McDaniel to the Chargers should boost IC and creative running back usage is reasonable because it follows his known tendencies. Projecting exact outcomes from that is where people often overstate confidence. Same with Kevin Stefanski and Kyle Pitts. A 100-plus target projection tells you the role could expand dramatically under a different philosophy, but it doesn't erase the fact that player talent, quarterback play, and weekly game script still decide whether targets become fantasy leverage. Rookie wide receiver analysis has a similar problem. Top 20 finishes are historically rare, so when a rookie gets priced near his ceiling, the burden of proof should rise. Draft capital helps, but quarterback quality, target competition, and coaching fit usually matter more than people admit. At wide receiver in general, touchdown and target share dependence is where ADP mistakes happen. Puka Nakua's touchdowns mattered a lot. Chris Olave's ceiling depends on ecosystem health. George Pickens and DJ Moore each show how quickly market sentiment can outrun stable underlying indicators. Fantasy players still treat injury and off-field risk like footnotes when they really belong inside the projection. Rashee Rice's red zone talent is exciting, but suspension or legal uncertainty can create zero-week outcomes that are especially painful in tournament formats. The Brendan Sorsby case is a harsher version of the same lesson. Non-football behavior can erase the entire path to fantasy relevance before it starts. And with injury carryover, the cleanest approach is to apply a real downgrade to ADP rather than vaguely saying you're concerned. If Malik Nabors, Christian Watson, or McCaffrey have durability issues, that should change what price you're willing to pay. The market isn't always wrong, but it's often pricing a cleaner story than the one players actually have to live through. That's it for Podkey Fantasy Football. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm. Podkey.